I bid you welcome.
I welcome you to my house.
Welcome to my house.
Welcome to my home.
Hello Horror Hounds, welcome to my horror house and welcome to the third and final movie that I'm going to be looking at, which adapts the H P Lovecraft short story The Colour Out of Space. I fell down a little bit of a colour out of space rabbit hole, as is in my nature. So following the 2019 Richard Stanley Colour Out of Space and the 1987 Italian-American co-production The Curse starring Will Wheaton, we've jumped a little bit further back in time to 1965 and the Boris Karloff starring, wonderfully titled Die Monster Die. The film starts off with opening credits over a glorious Technicolor whirlpool of reds and yellows and greens swirling down into the eye of the maelstrom. I miss opening credits. If you're the kind of person that likes sticking on an old movie that has opening credits that are sort of psychedelic and nebulous and go on for a few minutes just to get you settled in and comfy, then Die Monster Die is going to be exactly the kind of movie that you will love. If you're the kind of person that wants a nice, tightly plotted, well-reasoned film with narrative logic and actual things happening in it, maybe avoid Die Monster Die. It's a really good, what I call vibe movie, and as I go on throughout the review I will explain a little bit what I mean by that. Knowing that Die Monster Die is an adaptation of Lovecraft's The Colour Out of Space does give the game away a little bit, and it does rob the movie of its big final act reveal, whereas Colour Out of Space and The Curse sort of end Act 1 with the meteorite hitting the farm and then things getting contaminated and things and people mutating and going insane. Die Monster Die plays out much more like a mystery. That meteorite strike happened way before the film ever started, and instead we get a sort of gothic set mystery. A visitor comes into this place and something's going on in this mansion, in this house with this family. In that way, it shares a similar kind of DNA to the Poe pictures that Roger Corman did for AIP. This is an AIP picture, by the way. A similar vibe to his Vincent Price Poe pics of around about the same time. The difference with Die Monster Die is it's clearly set in the modern day, but definitely has an awful lot of that Roger Corman, Vincent Price Poe atmos going for it. The story's moved from Lovecraft's original in America to a small English village. They do make a bizarre little nod towards Lovecraft, and if you check out the sign at the railway station of the village that our hero arrives at, you can see that the village is rather incongruously called Arkham. I'm not too fussed about those changes. I think there's some analogy perhaps towards a very insular, small English village community and the inhabitants of some of Lovecraft's fictional New England towns. Here the visiting American is Steve, and he wants to go to the Whitley house, and none of the villagers will have any truck with him. They mostly don't really want to talk to him as soon as they find out where he's going. They won't even give him directions to the Whitley house, absolutely out of the question, taking him there. He's coming on invitation from Letitia Whitley, the matriarch of the house, and she's the mother of his girlfriend, and those two met, he and Susan, at university in America. They don't go the extra mile and say that they were studying at Miskatonic University, but you can't have it all, can you? So the mother, Letitia Whitley, has written to Steve asking him to come and visit. When he finally gets to the Whitley mansion, he meets the patriarch, Nahum Whitley, played by Boris Karloff, who gives him just as cold a reception as the villagers did and leaves him under no impression that he's not welcome. He's basically trespassing and he should leave immediately. Susan arrives and is very pleased to see her boyfriend and takes him upstairs to see Mother Letitia, who is in her sickbed, a grand sort of Victorian-looking four-poster bed. She's hidden behind the veils that surround her. She's just in silhouette and a strained voice. She asks to speak to Steve alone and entreats him, please get my daughter away from this place as soon as possible. And there the mystery is set. What's this strange sickness that's going around? Why has one of the maids disappeared? What are the strange goings on at night? In essence, what's happening at the Whitley Manor that's got everyone so spooked? As an aside, when you see Susan and Steve together and learn that they formed their relationship at a university in America, you do say to yourself, he was a teacher there though, right? Because she's a young lady and he's clearly in his 40s. Die Monster Die is one of these sort of movies that you wallow in, which is what I meant earlier when I said a vibe movie. You don't necessarily put it on for the intricacies of plot or even acting, to be fair. You put it on like a comfy pair of slippers. It's a lazy Sunday afternoon viewing where you want to slip into a fictional world. Probably the most high-profile vibe movie to my mind is Blade Runner, a phenomenal movie. I love it, but let's be honest, not an awful lot happens in Blade Runner, but you get to luxuriate in this world. For me, in the horror genre, another movie would be something like Universal's House of Dracula. Not sort of objectively a great movie, but I love the atmosphere in it. I love taking a little bit of a vacation from my life and entering that world for a while. It comforts me, it's my happy space, and I found that Die Monster Die offers that very similar kind of atmosphere, a nice little holiday away from my own mind, a nice little world that I can slip into that's comfortable and familiar to me, to make it welcoming and inviting. Even though it's trying to be scary, it's not a scary movie. It's like a big warm overcoat or a hot mug of chocolate, in the same way as going into the worlds of Universal's The Mummy and Frankenstein and Dracula is for all of us horror hounds. So yes, the movie moves at a glacial pace. Not much happens. There's not much internal logic. But for the short space of the movie, it's a world that I absolutely adored being inside. From the blasted heath taken straight out of Lovecraft's story that Steve passes on his way to the Whitley mansion, created by some gloriously bleak matte paintings. And just like opening credits to movies, I miss matte paintings. Once you get to the Whitley mansion, the grounds outside are always fog-bound. The interiors are oak panelled and shadowy with suits of armour and all sorts of gloriously eccentric knick-knacks, which can only build up through generations of rich, mad families. There's exploring by candlelight at night. There's something which screams somewhere on the grounds at night, and a strange green glow that emanates from the greenhouse. By the way, during one of Steve's nocturnal investigations, when he sees that glow coming from the greenhouse and some of the plants seeming to move strangely inside there, it instantly brought to mind the greenhouse in John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness, which is that brilliant director's own love letter to at least the tone and feel of Lovecraft's works. And I did wonder, I wonder if Carpenter has seen Die Monster Die, and the greenhouse from this movie directly informs the greenhouse that's in The Mouth of Madness. And I'm so glad I got this on Blu-ray. This is a Spanish Blu-ray rather than being cheap and getting a cheaper DVD, because these kind of vibe movies are really bolstered by excellent sound and excellent pictures. And the Blu-ray picture of this looks wonderful. The rolling fog banks, the shadowy mansion, the strange eerie glow from the greenhouse. It's absolutely everything that you need it to be if you want to dip into an atmosphere like this. I mean, there's even a murderous woman roaming the grounds with a black veil, all dressed in black. Once Steve and Susan get into the greenhouse, which is padlocked, an awful lot of the mansion is locked off and forbidden from Steve. Not that that will stop him. Once they get into the greenhouse, we move from the fog and the shadow and the candlelight into these really vibrant reds and greens and purples of all these sort of mutant plants that have been grown as a result of the meteor that we know about, but that the film is holding back from us. And we suddenly take a gear shift from creepy atmospheric gothic horror into 1950s sci-fi and B-movie sci-fi territory. And while this channel is ostensibly a horror channel, I have a deep and abiding love for 1950s sci-fi movies like It Came From Outer Space and Tarantula. So when the movie shifted gears into sci-fi terrain with big mutated plants that attack people and mutated creatures locked in the potting shed, it was well in my wheelhouse and I absolutely loved it. It's flawed. If you don't just want to watch it for its vibe and tell me that you think that Die Monster Die is boring, that the characters are stupid and that they make leaps of logic that make no sense whatsoever, I will absolutely salute you and wave you on your way. I absolutely know where you're coming from. Steve as our hero is a bullheaded dunce. He had me screaming at the screen when Susan, his girlfriend, runs in from the next room after being terrified at night and tells him that she's seen a figure at the window, and his first reaction is, "Are you sure you didn't just imagine it?" And while we sometimes have to hold our noses and accept those attitudes from decades old films, the character of Steve goes from being that slow and clueless to suddenly making enormous leaps of logic and intuition just to keep us, the audience, up to speed with what's going on with some of the revelations that he's finding. And I actually think that the scriptwriters could have held back on that information. We could have waited 5 more minutes and had Boris Karloff's character, who actually knows what's going on, tell us that information, rather than have stupid Steve suddenly becoming this Sherlock Holmesian mind who can make connections just based on looking at a glowing piece of rock. Because yes, it's all down to a meteor again, because this is an adaptation of The Colour Out of Space. We just don't find out about the meteor until the very end. The meteor in Die Monster Die struck way before the movie ever started, and Boris Karloff's character thought that he could use it as a way to promote plant and vegetable life and create a legacy and a name for the family that's not tied into the sort of devil worshipy past of previous generations. Much more great old ones, Lovecraft history from previous generations, and you'll see that in the decor when you go down into the cellar. He wants to make good on the Whitley name and create something that benefits people, but it's a Lovecraftian rock from out of space, and it mutates everything and turns the plants into killers and turns the people into psychopathic mutants. Perhaps the plot would have had more heft if I hadn't known that it was an adaptation of this work, so didn't know all along what the revelation was going to be. But as it is, even knowing that, there's a Scooby-Doo loveliness to all of this, with Steve and Susan wandering around the house and the grounds at night by candlelight, that I'm just on board with. We get a 1950s sci-fi movie dressed up as an atmospheric gothic horror film. I'm in for that ride. Yeah, nothing much happens. Yes, there's not that much internal logic to what people actually do inside the house, but I can forgive it, all of that, because it's a place I loved visiting. It's a place I loved spending time in. And it does build to the sheer goofiness of Boris Karloff finally being transformed by this space rock into a weird glowing creature, but seeing luminous green veins spreading down his arm, which are so reminiscent of the glowing green reagent that Herbert West uses in Stuart Gordon's 2 Reanimator movies, that the little horror-loving child in me just squeals with delight and says, yes, Herbert West's reagent in the Reanimator movies is made using stuff from the space rock in Die Monster Die. It's all connected, and you can't convince me otherwise. In a throwback to the horror movies of the 30s and 40s, the mansion burns down at the end. Of course it does. What more do you want? This is exactly how a movie like this should end. It does end on a slightly ambiguous note and says, well, maybe Steve was right and this is all just a science thing, and the meteor from space brought something to Earth which has caused all of this mutation and death. Whitley, by the end, completely buys into the family curse and suggests that the devil worshipping, much more aligned to the great old ones Lovecraft of his other stories, called down in a previous generation this manifestation of the family curse, which is now finding its fruition here. And the film does end on an ambiguous note with just the portrait of that elder generation of the Whitley family superimposed over the burning house, and it goes, just maybe you've been watching a horror film all along, or maybe you've been watching a 1950s sci-fi movie. I've been watching both, and I kind of loved them both.